Ellie, you want to call roll?
Thank you, Chair. Beiersdorf.
Here.
DiLorenzo.
Here.
Hanley.
Here.
Ingraham.
Here.
Jacobs.
Here.
Samirsky.
Here.
Wallach.
Here. Okay. Moving on to the approval of the agenda. I believe there's an addendum.
That's me. Thank you. And Park Board, just so you're aware, we have moved to a little bit of a shifted agenda. We were following the City Council's version of the agenda. So a couple things have moved, and then one thing was added, which is the approval of the agenda. So we will look for a formal approval of the agenda. Just to let you know, tonight we do have an addenda. The addenda is in regards to business item 7A, the Purgatory Park Master Plan, and that would be email feedback that we received after the distribution of the packet on Friday. So with that, I'll turn that back to you for approval.
Do I have a motion to approve the agenda, or the agenda?
Yeah, I make a motion to approve the agenda.
We have a second.
Second.
You want to call roll?
Beiersdorf.
Approve.
DiLorenzo.
Approve.
Hanley.
Approve.
Ingraham.
Approve.
Jacobs.
Approve.
Samirsky.
Approve.
Wallach.
Approve. Now we move on to the approval of the minutes from the March 6th meeting. If there's any discussion, let that be had. If not, I will hear a motion to approve.
Yeah, I make a motion to approve the minutes.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Would you like to call roll?
Beiersdorf.
Approve.
DiLorenzo.
Approve.
Hanley.
Approve.
Ingraham.
Approve.
Jacobs.
Approve.
Samirsky.
Approve.
Wallach.
Approve. Okay. Looking out in the crowd, do we have any citizens wishing to discuss items not on the agenda? So we'll talk about the draft Purgatory Park Master Plan. Wow. Later, but is there anybody that wishes to talk about coming up?
Yeah.
Oh, so come on up. Oh, sure. Yep. Just state your name, your address.
Greg Johnson, 18810 Kingswood Terrace.
Okay.
We have a group here, and you probably aware we sent an email to you guys about Minnesota Pause for Parks. It's a new group that we formed, and we'd like to share a few things with you. If we could just have a couple minutes on the agenda to kind of run through that, give you a high-level summary of what our group is doing, what we're here for, and hopefully get your buy-in.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, did you guys want to come up now and share?
Right at the beginning?
Yeah?
So, we're kind of missing some of it, but I'm ready to go. Yeah. How about Sure.
Sorry about that.
So
We can even talk in tandem.
Yeah. So how about I'll lead up with.
Okay.
You
and
just
then I'll
both
kick it
need
off.
to identify yourself.
Greg John.
Oh, go ahead. Chris Kapishke, 4528 Saddlewood Drive.
All right, Greg Johnson again. Our group evolved out of concerns surrounding some elements of the master plan for Purgatory Park, namely the potential restrictions in the off-leash uses of the park. This started up last year as a small Facebook group, but grew quickly and now numbers nearly a couple hundred in members. There's a great amount of interest in getting us more organized, especially in communicating as a group. And everyone was very interested in wanting to be more involved in the potential outcomes of that master plan, particularly how the impacts could be and how we use the park as dog walkers. We ultimately recognized that it was best to have a more formal approach and created a nonprofit called Minnetonka Pause for Parks. We have about a dozen or so members that have created this nonprofit, and we expect that this group will drive communication to our larger base of Purgatory Park dog owners. And importantly, be a liaison to you folks on the park board. Many in our group could not be here tonight, but I'd like to share that we have about half of them here. There's a few more that are missing. But I'd like to now share that one of our other members would like to share a little bit more about our mission and some of our objectives and a little bit more what we want to get out of this group.
Thanks, Greg. So we created Minnetonka Paws for Parks to ensure preservation of the off-leash experience that is key to the health and well-being of users and their canine friends. Our goals are to advocate for park environment that is ideal for citizens and their canine companions, foster stronger compliance and park policies that protect users and the ecology of the park, formalize communication to the park board and other city officials as needed, and organize fun events to showcase the dog owner community engagement and desire to be seen in a positive light. So as such, we've already organized a cleanup event at Purgatory Park for this coming Sunday. We've communicated it. Word of mouth is probably our best communication. We've been trying to spread it when we're out there. We've also posted it on the Facebook page that Greg mentioned. We did get some responses. We've sent it to an email to the park board as well. We've gotten a couple of responses, so thank you for that. And if you can't join us, that's totally fine, but we will continue to try to look for these opportunities to showcase our dedication and, again, so we can be seen in a positive light to the park board and to the community. And to come, we will have a website, and so we'll be able to post our goals and what we're trying to accomplish there as well. So that's it. Thank you.
What time is the event?
Oh, I'm sorry, 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock on Sunday afternoon.
One more additional comment. As a final note, on page 60 of the master plan, there's a reference to existing partners. We'd like your consideration to be included along some of those other partners, if we could. We believe this group that we're creating would be an outstanding addition to that group of partners that you work with. So please take that under consideration. Thank you. We look forward to working together with you on all ways to make Purgatory and all parks better for all users. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to special matters.
Correct, and we don't have any special matters this evening.
Okay, no special matters. All right, so we can move on to the business item, the Purgatory Park Master Plan final review.
Sounds good, and I will turn that over to Matt for the presentation.
Thank you, Park Board. Thanks for having me back this evening. Excited to be back. I'm going to begin the presentation with a little bit of a reminder of how we've gotten to this point so far, and then I'm going to walk through a basic summary of the numerous comments we've received during this master plan review period, and sort of put some thoughts together around those particular comments that we received and address some of those. So a little bit of a background: the Parks Open Space and Trails Plan, adopted by the city a few years ago, lays out a 15 to 20-year roadmap for planning and implementing park improvements. The plan is really to help you guys on the park board and the city council and staff prioritize what park improvements might be necessary and ensure that we're allocating those budgets and those staff times and other things, the investments in the city appropriately to meet the needs of the entire community. So the timeline for this particular project out of that post plan was to move forward with master planning for our various parks. The initial outreach and engagement for Purgatory Park concluded this October 13th. We had a series of outreach events, open houses, pop-ups in the park, walking with folks in the park during this process. The public feedback summary was presented to you folks in December. We had a preliminary discussion on the 3rd, and that was followed by the initial draft master plan was made available for public review mid-January. That stayed open for 30 days, and then on February 7th, the consultant helped present, I presented on this February 7th, and then the consultant helped present on March 6th those initial draft plans. Tonight, we're going to go through what we call the final draft at this point, and for you folks to review and potentially recommend to the City Council. So a little bit of a review of where we received comments. We've hosted a Minnetonka Matters website for about 6 months now, or longer actually, on this particular project, but it went live with our recent updates early in the spring. We recorded comments from folks in a variety of ways. There was a guest book that you could post a note and your name associated with it if you'd like. Folks could also respond to particular survey questions. 76 residents provided survey question responses to the plan feedback. That was after the draft master plan went up for that 30-day comment period. We had over 13,000 unique page views for that particular website, and we had 39 mapping tool submissions. We had 61 unique contributions to the public guest book. That would be like a Facebook message board, essentially, where everybody could see your comments. That particular portion of the website received 388 total visits. We received comments and survey responses that have been included in the park board packet. So there were hundreds of particular comments related to the survey questions to have folks address the particular thoughts that they had about the master plan that was put up for comment. So we've received hundreds of comments. It's a very popular park, and people are certainly interested in what changes might be coming. So what staff did was we sort of accumulated those comments into key concerns that we identified through these comments. I'm going to walk through those tonight and sort of provide feedback from a staff perspective. So the key concerns that we identified were, this was all out of the comments, were the environmental impacts and the compliance with the Natural Resources Master Plan, the nomenclature related to the park around the preserve status and compliance with the park's open space and trails plan, and a lot of sentiment related to ordinance enforceability and the general sense of people complaining about dogs in the park. A lot of comments about the conceptual formal off-leash dog area shown in the master plan. A lot of comments on the general outreach and engagement process that we undertook for this project. A lot of comments about the conceptual idea of parking on the Stodola Road site where parking currently exists. And a lot of comments about the trail conditions and the overall locations in those parks. So I'm going to go over those somewhat briefly. So environmental impacts and compliance with the Natural Resources Master Plan. We received many comments suggesting that the master plan sort of disregarded the goals or the recommendations of the NRMP to some degree. But we'd like to say that the restoration and maintenance plans for the park, these were separate documents approved early last year, have already been approved by you guys, and restoration is currently underway. The master plan reflects these plant communities and the goals related to those restoration efforts and are not contingent on making those restoration-based changes to the park. The NRMP also identifies the need to support our residents' lifestyles while mitigating disturbance and performing thoughtful, resilient restoration, so that balance to some degree of how people use the park and accomplishing these restoration goals. The master plan does also acknowledge that foot traffic damage and the recent expansion of some eroded trails in particular areas. We've documented that. And we do highlight some ways to repair that particular erosion, close it as necessary. But we do not feel that the damage in the park would require a separate environmental review or environmental impact statement for these master plan level decisions that we're making during this process. We received a lot of questions about the sense of preserve and how it would apply to Purgatory Park and other parks in the park system in Minnetonka. This preserve status comes out of the park's open space and trails plan. The definition of the preserve is parkland maintained as habitat, open space, and for visual aesthetics and buffering. It also provides passive use opportunities, i.e. trails, overlooks, interpretive programs, nature play areas, etc. And this draft master plan, we believe, is in line with this particular definition of preserve. Also, the Purgatory Park has been designated a preserve since 2001 during the previous post plan that was created. We received a lot of comments about the sense of ordinance enforceability and it being difficult to enforce, and the general sense that a lot of folks say they didn't anecdotally see a lot of dog complaints. The plan recommends a comprehensive review of the current off-leash dog ordinance language to the City Council. Elements of the ordinance would be identified for consideration would be the sense of unmaintained versus maintained area definitions in the ordinance language currently, and this concept of under voice command. Public safety representatives would be included in that discussion with the City Council, bringing their data and their recommendations to that proceeding. We received a lot of comments about the concept for a formal off-leash dog area. This would be a fenced-in area. We received numerous comments saying that fenced-in areas are dangerous for dogs and the folks that bring the dogs there, and do not necessarily offer value for residents. The master plan, as master plans do, it recommends studying the feasibility of off-leash areas, including this one shown. It is not saying that this needs to happen by any means. This would be a separate undertaking with the standard outreach and engagement process that we go through for all our projects. And it would be part of a recommended citywide dog park strategy effort. This would be to look at parcels throughout the city and look for other opportunities to do fenced-in areas. And it is unrelated to the ordinance related to off-leash dogs overall. This would be a separate effort. We received a lot of comments that outreach and engagement wasn't thorough enough, that we were ineffective or generally did not represent the opinion of the community. These outreach and engagements efforts are difficult. A lot of folks don't necessarily tune into those. We did receive quite a high degree of comments for a project to this effect. We really had a multi-pronged approach and included a bunch of pop-ups in public places, the Unmapped Brewing, City Hall. We received hundreds of visitors at those sites. We had pop-up events in the park. We walked and talked with people on Saturday mornings and in the evening, the most popular times for folks to be walking in the park. We had numerous signs up in the park throughout the park with a easy to scan QR code. We tabled at the farmers market. We really used all our opportunities to engage with folks as much as we could. Unfortunately, people tune out to some of our city messaging at time, and it's hard to break through that. We did, in comparison, the post plan received 661 responses to their initial survey, and this master plan received 624 responses to the initial project survey regarding park use. So that was the earliest data that we showed where folks indicated how far they would walk to the park or what they use the park for, those comments. We've recently received a lot of comments regarding to the Stadola Road entrance. Those comments generally suggest that no additional parking would be needed at Stadola Road. The recommendation in our current master plan is to study the existing conditions. We understand that cars park in this cul-de-sac and up the road there currently. The goal would not be to increase parking by any means in this area. It would merely be to create a little bit more of an organized, potentially create more of an organized parking for the general amount of cars that we see there on a regular basis these days. It's really about safety, getting emergency vehicles through there, and ultimately this would be a feasibility study. It would not edict a change by any means. It would just look at the current conditions, traffic counts, try to get an understanding of the safety concerns with emergency vehicles turning around in that cul-de-sac. We received a lot of comments about trail conditions and locations generally. A lot of folks obviously go to this park for the trails. There's been questions that we did not adequately address trail erosion. This is a master plan document. Generally, this level of documentation sort of lays out the higher level concerns. The plan does incorporate trail detailing, which would address erosion issues and describes ways in which we'd mitigate that. Loose and compacted soils, reseed, closed trails as necessary. The plan really lays out a method to pursue this sort of ongoing trail assessment, maintenance, and rehabilitation strategy. So I'm going to go through the recommendations in the park. These are the key areas of the master plan and sort of highlight again some of the key recommendations from staff through this master plan for your consideration. So the big one, dogs in the park recommendation. We're recommending a short-term action to review the ordinance and park rules by the city council. In the meantime, we can be updating and expanding signage in the park, adding waste and bag stations in appropriate locations. We can develop and install conflict point mitigation strategies. These would be spots where some of the heavily used off-leash areas come very close to some of our key trails. These short reaches could be temporarily separated with some tasteful fencing with the right materials, and sort of mitigate some of those heavily identified conflict zones. And then long-term, perform this citywide dog park strategy plan that I described earlier, pulling in folks from the community to help figure out what Minnetonka's strategy for dogs overall should be in the future. Trail recommendations. We'll continue to review the informal trails and field fit some small trail changes to support the existing trail network. It's really a wonderful experience out there. We will begin to implement the updated trail maintenance guidelines, and we'll create a thoughtful wayfinding and trail map and install that with the newly designed signage in the park. Parking recommendations, as I mentioned, we'll study the current conditions at Zedola and consider parking stalls that do not limit emergency vehicle access. Again, I'd further reiterate that any parking recommendations would not seek to increase traffic. We understand this is a residential area. I live right near this spot. I'm very familiar with it. It would merely be to create safe and easily pull in and out stalls for this particular spot where there's a lot of parking already. And then additionally study parking adjacent to Excelsior Road as through the Red Barn site analysis. So I'll get to that. For the Red Barn, we would incorporate the Red Barn parcel into the boundaries of Purgatory Park. It is currently city property, but it's not officially part of Purgatory Park, but could be folded in. There would be the option to perform a study to identify feasibility of some sort of public use facility. We received a lot of comments regarding some sort of nature center. A lot of big questions would come out of this process. Who would use this? How much would it cost? Would it serve residents appropriately? A study to this effect would be fairly large, and we would need to look at the upfront costs and the opportunity for cost share or grants or other potential bonding even, and what the long-term operational expenses of this would be. And this idea of sense of place. So we really like this master plan to reinforce the sense of place that residents have come to love about Purgatory Park. We would continue restoration efforts while balancing passive use, such as dogs in the park. We would adopt the memorial feature design standards that are included in the master plan, how to build these things, what their spacing should be. We would look at interpretation of restoration and other significant park features. And we would enhance or add key special places. There's some newly identified overlooks and good locations for benches in the parks that do not currently have benches, and some other locations where the benches aren't really in the greatest spots. So look at those closer and identify what's considered prospect and refuge areas where you can step off the trail and have a private bench to yourself and overlook the beautiful vistas in Purgatory Park. So our recommendation at this point would be to make a motion recommending approval of the draft Purgatory Master Plan to the City Council. The final draft master plan will remain in draft form while recommended to the City Council, so we'll still be adopting changes as necessary, and we will participate in the City Council discussions related to the plan and the ordinance review when that takes place. That's all from me.
I want to say thank you, Matt, for presenting this and for all the work you guys have done with this plan. I know we've been talking about this for a long time, and I think it is just a very impressive document, and it goes to highlight the importance of Purgatory Park to a lot of people. So what we'll do is we'll open it up for board discussion, and then we'll open it up for public comment, and then after public comment, we'll reopen the board discussion. So I'll start with discussion on the board. Does anyone have any feedback for Matt? Any questions?
I have a question.
Yep.
I have a question about the buffer that's listed in the plan. It's marked as 50 feet. Is there some concept in your mind or somebody's mind of how to mark that?
Yes, so I think as part of this, these more clarified park rules related to off-leash could have some sort of boundary marker. And I have a big concern about cluttering the park with too many signs, so we would need to assess, stand in the most used spaces and the main sight lines and place those effectively with some sort of iconography or a color code that wouldn't clutter the landscape too much, but do those in the appropriate spacing where they're generally recognizable at a distance, so folks could understand to call their dog back if it was getting within that buffer potentially.
Okay. And is traffic slowing on Stadola Road a park issue, or is that more somebody else?
It enters into engineering. Street engineering is part of the, but obviously it's an entrance to the park. It wasn't initially a formal entrance. It's gotten larger over time, and I know it does get quite busy, and parking ends up crowding the road on one side all the way up on, over the creek and up that hill there quite a ways. So really the concern is it's not designed for parking, but we do get dozens of cars at times, half a dozen cars pretty commonly in that spot. So if there was an emergency vehicle that needed to turn around there, it wouldn't be able to do so.
And I was particularly noticed the comments about people are driving fast. And I have to say, I see it in my own neighborhood, so
Yeah.
it's not just on Stadola Road. But
That concern of it being a formal parking lot or entrance to the park would attract more traffic. That would be definitely a concern and something we would address with a feasibility.
And the other, my other question is about bicycles, particularly mountain bikes on the trails. I remember during the comments about the mountain bike trails in Lone Lake that once those trails were done, nobody would bike in Purgatory anymore, and sadly that seems to be not true. I would be interested either now or later in hearing more about what other parks have done about that.
Sure. Yeah. Up there.
Yeah, I have a question. I wanted to kind of like Ann, just on the buffer. It says 50 feet from primary trail on both sides. So is that like from the center line? So it'd be a total of 100 feet if you looked from side to side.
Yeah, that felt like us a reasonable buffer in which you could call your dog back potentially.
Okay. Then I'm trying to think about what's a question for now versus later. I guess I'll do it now. I am curious. I mentioned this at the last meeting. The buffer that's along on, I don't know if we can pull up the map or not, but the buffer along the creek on the south side, which is on the right side of the map, that has the the pink or red lines on it. I'm curious if the intent is to eliminate the use of the trail along the creek, because, and I'm not sure, it indicates it's 50 feet, but in that area there's really only half the distance, if you will. In other words, if we're trying to buffer on the main trail, I can understand. I'm a little wondering about 50 feet on each side, but I can understand that. But along the creek there, you have a natural barrier of the creek, and so in a sense you're making an even larger buffer to the one side, and then those trails along the creek aren't usable, and the little sliver of green pointing straight up, that's not the best map for this, but it's on the screen, is basically not usable, because if you have a 50-foot buffer on both sides, that leaves about a 15-foot gap on the hillside that someone could try to navigate where there are no trails now. So I
Yeah.
missed, just the integrity of the map. It'd be better to show you don't want anybody up there at all than to sort of imply that there's still the possibility to have trails there.
I think appropriate decisions in the field where we could place these signs that Board Member Hanley mentioned, we'd fit those in a reasonable location where folks could get through, but also keep the primary trail free from off-leash dogs where appropriate. And in those neck-down spots where it gets close to the creek and crosses the creek, a general 100-foot buffer was applied to the trail throughout, and I think there could be some field fitting to accommodate that area.
Yeah, I guess the key question is whether or not it's intended to be able to still use the trail along the creek or not, basically. And to the same extent, the trail from the cul-de-sac that runs along the lot line of I think it's sort of a red house that sits on the corner there, because that trail will certainly be within 50 feet in a lot of places. I just think that would be good to clarify, because I'm glad we're preserving the use of off-leash dogs in those wooded areas, but the way the map looks, some of the areas are not accessible if you actually have that size buffer.
I feel the goal would be to keep dogs on leash between Stadola cul-de-sac to, when you're out of that buffer zone, then you could take your
Well,
dog
I'm
on
talking
leash.
about going straight up into the woods.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
So you see where again, if you're on
I
the
see, yeah.
map with the red line, there are trails right along that. In fact, you can see the orange trail that's marked as keeping it open is in fact inside the buffer area. So I don't want to beat this up too much,
Sure.
but it's just I don't think we want to encourage people to make new trails to
For
avoid
sure.
a buffer, basically.
Absolutely, yes.
And I just was curious, it's a question, last time there seemed to be a little bit more interest in the document around the fence along the eastern trail. And this time it's very clearly in all caps, optional. And I think given the amount of public safety interest that's been expressed in feedback in the surveys and just general commentary, that's the most, I think, difficult area, most contentious area, if you will, especially to the far right there, where it runs right along the path. And without that fence, there really isn't anything in the plan that mitigates the public safety issue, which I think is not acceptable, personally. But we'll talk more about that later. But was there any discussion why you decided to make that less important?
It's not that it's less important, it's that it's difficult for us to show on this plan exactly where the fence should go, how it would follow the contours. So in this conceptual level, I hesitated to show a fence line on here without appropriately sort of field fitting it. Flagging it out in the field, taking a look from afar, choosing materials, where would we be drilling posts, those sorts of
But the
concerns.
recommendation is that it's optional, as opposed to something that's being planned out.
Yep. Understood.
A piece that I wanted to just circle back on is the signage specifically around dogs and how they should be leashed or not. Right now, I know there's some confusion, and I didn't see it explicitly in the draft. So are we waiting potentially on an ordinance before that? Are we going to be clear, some just clarity around what the signage will look like? You are entering an on-leash area, or you are exiting an on or off, just so it can be super clear, and as community members, I could see if somebody is. I think right now it's very unclear, and the ambiguity, being ambiguous, makes it hard to enforce as a neighbor.
Yeah, well, it's tough to answer that one just yet. We were kind of hoping to get into the the ordinance conversation a little bit to determine how we would phrase that language. We have put up the existing signs that were in place and addressed the current park rules. We've added some of those, but we understand they're quite confusing and don't necessarily accomplish what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I guess my fear would just be we wait on an ordinance that may or may not happen and may take a long time to happen while this is done, and now we just have all this signage that never addressed the issue that I think many people have asked for, is just clarity around what the expectations are. And if there are changes and people aren't sure what the changes are they doing it or not, I like to believe everyone wants to follow the expectations, but if we don't clearly label them, it's hard to follow them.
Yep. We did receive feedback at the last park board meeting that you folks would like to review the language, and that was noted, so yes.
Is there any more feedback from the park board? Okay, so before we move forward with a motion, I want to open the floor up to public comment. Just a couple things before we do. We've had a great deal of public comment over the last 3 months, and we really appreciate everyone who's come in, spoke, sent in comments and feedback. It's really helped inform and guide the discussions, both at the park board level and the city level. And I do believe a lot of the comments have been integrated into this plan. So while tonight we want everyone to feel heard, we would like to focus on new comments or comments from people who haven't had a chance to speak maybe in the past. And we're going to limit the public comment to about 30 minutes, which will start in a few minutes. And those who wish to speak should line up. So when you come to the podium, like you said, please state your name and address. We welcome all feedback, but please be respectful to the board, staff, and all in attendance. I don't see it being an issue tonight, but everyone should feel safe and comfortable speaking. Please address the board, and we'll respond to comments at the end of the public comment period. No clapping, whistling, stamping feet, booing. Comments from the audience aren't allowed. Again, I don't see that being an issue, but I just throw it out there. Yeah. So I want to open up the floor for public comment now. Yeah, I said that.
Hello, Eric Murr at 5554 Nantucket Place. Thank you for putting this all together, working on it again. I'll make it quick. Mostly I'm just taking a step back and looking at it, and I'm curious if you can elaborate. If this is approved now, I feel like, what is the clear thing that the city council might actually start implementing? Is it the 50-foot buffer? Because it seems to me that the parking lot, the ordinance, obviously, and many other things are for further study. So mostly I'm just curious about when this goes in front of them, if they say, yes, we approve this, kind of what does that actually mean for things going forward? Thanks.
I'm Andrew Jennings from 4330 Windward Way. This is really, I'm slightly confused the way this is phrased. And I think, so I'd like some clarification at least is what it means. Is there any way, Matt, we could get page 43 up on the screen?
Can we do that, Sarah?
Of the draft plan. Page 43 is fairly central to all the dog issues. On page 43, for these are the short-term recommendations, it's discussing the better defined specific areas of the park where off-leash activity is allowable. This I find extremely strange to read. Basically, the first half of it, which I can either read it or you can read it yourself. I don't know which way you do. The first half, we're talking about feedback provided through the planning process. It talks about, well, I'll just read it. Site review indicates most intensive off-leash dog activity occurring in the area east of Purgatory Creek, and west of the primary trail. While off-leash dogs are present throughout the park, this tends to be the location where the majority of dog owners congregate and interact with one another. An interim step in addressing off-leash dog conflicts in the park would be to specify this location as an acceptable place for off-leash activity. Does that entire series of sentences really belong, given the change from the preliminary to the draft, the plans first presented in February and secondly in March? Because it's very strange reading if you look at then the map that follows. I think it just adds intense confusion. I think this is something we have to be clear about. That is the first, again, I'm just seeking clarity so we don't get confused later. Also, if we step back one page, can we, to page 42, again under better defined specific areas part, it says a concept shows potential in the northwest corner of the park. Does that sentence even belong in here? This is a short-term recommendation. I feel it adds confusion. I really think all that should belong in a long-term thing, so you're going to have a city-wide examination of off-leash dogs. I don't think it's anything to do with Purgatory Park per se. I think that's all I wish to comment at the moment.
Thank you.
Chris Kapishke, 4528 Saddlewood Drive. Just as the ordinances are reviewed, I would like to propose that Minnetonka Pause for Parks have a seat at the table as you review those to just ensure that we're taking into consideration, how they will actually be impacted. And then as being an organized group, how we can potentially help foster that and communicate that at the parks. So thank you.
Angela Moreira, 5554 Nantucket Place. I would just like to have a question and comment. Basically, I was wondering if the neighbors of Nantucket Place will have a seat at the table to discuss some of these safety measures that you're proposing, such as the temporary fence. I think it's absolutely critical that we have some sort of barrier to protect our neighborhood. Also, a simple fence line where dogs can run around, that is not adequate. And I don't think self-policing is adequate either. So I'd like to know if sometime in the near future, they are finally going to sit down with the Nantucket neighbors and have a discussion. Thank you.
Is there anybody else who would like to speak tonight?
All right. Heather Holm, 15327 Lakeshore Avenue. I know staff mentioned the ambiguity of maintained, unmaintained, and that would be looked at further. My question is, can we have a map produced of the park that shows the maintained and unmaintained areas as part of the next steps of this process? Thank you.
Okay. If there is nobody else wishing to speak, we will close the floor for public comment and open the park board discussion back up. Is there any feedback or discussion to be had from the park board?
It's difficult when we hear comments. We're not allowed to respond right away to your comments, so I apologize. It's really weird to say something and then have a silent group.
Yeah.
So let's try and follow up on a few of these are pretty easy to do. Someone brought up, after city council approves, what are some of the first actions at the park? Could you cover that, Matt?
I don't know that I have a great answer for that. The plan would then, we would receive general plan feedback from them and make edits to this plan based on the comments they've had. So that would be the approval of this particular plan, depending on their edits that they would offer to us. But in terms of them taking up the ordinance and the dog rules, that would be up to their schedule. And this plan would just simply recommend that, so it's hard for me to say.
Could then, relative to the plan, could activities like starting to mark out boundaries and working with a subgroup of interested people start talking about which trails might be closed and that kind of stuff?
Yes, that would be the idea. Once this is finalized and approved by the city council, then those short-term recommendations around closing, certain trails that head straight downhill and are causing erosion, installing fencing to these conflict zones, and working with neighbors and other interested folks, that would begin that process.
And since we're responding to the comments, I think I would agree with Andrew's comments. I actually had highlighted those two sections separately too. The comment on page 43, I highlighted that same half sentence because it seemed to imply, and I think some of the feedback we get, it's like people, I think, keep thinking we're restricting the off-leash area to what I'll call the center prairie. And that seems to be an ongoing thought, even though the map clearly shows that that's not the case. But that one half sentence, specify this location as an acceptable place for off-leash activity to occur, sort of, if you're really reading that close, sounds like that's the only area. And that's not what the map's, and so I don't know if that's a residual from the very first plan or not, but I do agree that that could probably be worded differently or explained better. And I also agree that on the 42 that the tossing in the concept of the off-leash area muddies the other things and gets people suspicious, so it probably doesn't need to be there on that one. And regarding, I think Chris's comment about the involvement in the ordinance discussion, I don't know, maybe you guys could answer better, but I'm guessing the way that works is, as you may have noticed in your Minnetonka communications today, there's 2 new ordinances being discussed. And so they're reaching out for public comment. So I'm guessing the way, the official way that works is they'll start a whole process for comment and review and comment review, and so anyone and everyone has a chance to, and whether there's formalized subgroups or not, I really don't know. I don't think that's normal. I think it's more as a group, you have some leverage to do that, but I think it would come through the whole ordinance review process.
And as I understand it, it's between the general public and the city council, not the park board.
Right, yeah,
Correct.
for the animal ordinance, I would think.
Correct.
One other just thing I thought I'd mention is, because it's referenced, there was a comment made about maintained and unmaintained, and also a comment in Matt's summary. One nuance that I think I'm correct on is we can't control this animal ordinance, that's the city, but we, I assume, can weigh in on the park regulations. The park regulations make the distinction between maintained and unmaintained areas. The city ordinance for animal control does not. So if we get around to that whole issue about what, where, if they can be, because I do think there's, we are maintaining the entire park now, pretty much, with restoration efforts. And I think our restoration efforts are maintaining the park. So the language in our regulations, you know, if someone wanted to hold their hand up and say, you know, you can't do anything in the park off leash because it's all being maintained, I mean, that's a fact. I don't think that's the intention of the city, but that's the way it's worded. And so maybe that's something as a park board or the staff, we should be looking at the regulation in the park regulation relative to that, because it doesn't appear, I don't believe, in the city ordinance, but it does clearly appear in the park regulation.
I did notice in this version of the plan that the words were changed to primary and informal, and I'm warming up to that. I think it is clearer than the previous words we've been using.
Thank you.
One thing I'm just wanting to voice concern around is right now I feel like there's a lot of energized community members concerned about this, and a fear I have is it's going to go to city council, we're going to hear about an ordinance, it's going to take time, we're going to go back and forth, and so one thing I would like, and I don't know the parameters in which we could do this, is really looking at the regulations, getting all the feedback. We've had a lot of involved people give us clear things that they're asking for, and just asking for a little more clarity. Where is the fence? Where are dogs allowed? Where are they not allowed? What can we do? Because I think there's a lot of people who really want to keep their dogs off leash, and if they understand the parameters, they can also enforce it in a way within their own community. And then also, if you're a neighbor, you can also clearly point and say, hey, these are the new expectations. And so I guess for me, I just want to see what we can do or what we can bring to the city council to make as much clarity for neighbors as much as possible is kind of a focus I have, because even listening to this, there's still a few points that I'm feeling like haven't been all the way flushed out. And maybe I just need to be patient as well, which is not a strength of mine.
Responding to Angela's comment about fencing or somehow protecting all the neighbors whose land abuts the park, because I know we've heard from people in the Stadola Road end of the park as well. I don't know how much it would cost to fence the whole perimeter of the park. Maybe it's not needed on the south end where there's, as Dave pointed out, the creek is the boundary. But I can understand why somebody would want a fence. It's possible that with the boundaries better defined, and if you look on page 43, no, 45 maybe, sorry, and I've just, the one that has the map with the pink on it. That one. If there are no dogs allowed, well, I don't know, if on the top side of the park, that's all buffer. I don't know if that's going to help. But I do understand about the fact that if it's not a continuous fence, the dogs can run around it. I don't know what the answer is. I hear you.
The approach that I've been thinking of in my head is this is plan A, right? The least intrusive. If it doesn't, right? If big issues still continue, you know, plan B or plan C, which is a little more guarded. Because I'm assuming all the neighbors will have different opinions on whether they want a fence in their backyard, right? That's going to probably be a very mixed opinions on that.
Maybe. I don't know.
You know,
Maybe.
is it that? But that's kind of how I've
yeah,
been thinking about it as a first approach.
As long as the neighbors can stand it, I think it makes sense to me to see how much this helps.
And just a quick point of clarification, the pink red area shown on that particular figure would be leashed areas, and once you were outside of those, they could be off leash.
Is there any more discussion or feedback from the park board?
To the comments or for a vote?
Well, we'll do the vote after. I mean, if we don't have any more public comments, then we can move on to a motion to approve or what have you.
I'll have one more.
Yeah, go ahead.
I like Katie's suggestion that that essentially this is a living document, and as we observe how things are working, if it's bad, then we adjust. So it's our direction. It's not, we're not cast in concrete.
If this is kind of our discussion before a vote, I guess, first, I really do appreciate all the effort that's gone into this. I think staff and the consultant put a lot of effort into it. I think very appreciative of all the feedback we received. I think the city despite what people think, the city did a great job trying to elicit as much comments as possible. And as tends to happen when people finally become aware, then we got more comments, which was great. But I do think there was a lot of comments, and a lot of work went into dealing with those comments. I think actually, just as an aside, I think the formation of the new group is the Pause for Parks is a positive thing. One, I think in terms of just the kinds of events they're planning to do this Sunday, but also I think one of the best things to help resolve issues are kind of shared accountability among the communities. And I think if there's a community, an organization, you're more apt to have people go, I really need because I think from the feedback we received, the bulk of all comments we had from the dog lovers are they respect the concepts of the rules. It's just they even never see anything bad happen, or it's not their dog, and it is the exception that's causing the problem. And so I think having an organized group, it will help hopefully some self-enforcement, so to speak. And I think that's a great thing. I really appreciate all the effort that goes into our restoration on the part of our volunteers, the Friends and other volunteers and city people. Purgatory is a really critical, unique area. Well, actually, all of our parks, I think, are pretty unique, but Purgatory is very different. And I think the effort we put in to try and restore it is critical, and I appreciate everyone's effort. Interestingly, I was at the Three Rivers Park annual meeting this last week, and discovered that of all the, at least according to Three Rivers Park, of all the environments, if you will, in the world, the most endangered is prairie. 1% of all prairie around the world still exists, and that's our little sweet spot in the center of this park that we're trying to preserve. So I think the effort's there. Leslie, that's right. That's our prairie area there in the middle. So I think it's important that we kind of work hard to balance public use of that as well as trying to maintain that area. I generally agree with the plan. I think there's a lot of good that's gone in it. I think it's incredibly contingent upon the ordinance animal ordinance as it's currently written. And given the way it's written now, I think I actually appreciate the off-leash areas in the park. And I don't think there's anything we can do other than that with the current animal ordinance. I do think I do think that safety is a big deal, and we've talked about that. And personally, I will find it hard to vote yes for this plan with the fencing being an optional issue. I think we need to have, I personally think we need to have a real stated commitment that we're going to figure out how to help provide more structure, if you will, or barrier along that eastern main trail. I think that's, that's the area that, to me, from everything, the comments you always get about where there's been a bad interaction and the Nantucket neighborhoods on that side, and I think I think it's really critical that we have that be a part of the plan. In the absence of that, it'll be hard for me to support it. I also agree with Ella's comments. I think we need to be very prescriptive. Dogs must be on leash. Should be little signs on that main trail. And when you leave the prairie area to go down across the creek, it should be dogs must be leashed beyond this point on the main trail. Kind of just really, nuts. The sign we have now is great if you really want to sit and study and think about what it means. But I think we need to be really clear where dogs need to be leashed and where they don't. So, but I do appreciate all the work that's gone into this. Thanks.
Okay. Well, with all of that, we are looking for a motion tonight. Approved to the city council, or however you'd like to phrase it.
Chair, can I step in for 1 second?
Absolutely.
Just to remind you all that you can make a motion with, if you have a change
yeah.
here or there, you can add that to your motion and then send it to the city council. So I know Park Board Member Ingraham had a comment, and I think there were a couple others. So if you wanted to add a few things, make a few changes, you could do that.
One thing I would like to add is just more clarity around signage for approval for me. I did not feel like this was sufficient enough. Going off of what you said is making it super clear. Dogs on leash, dogs off leash. Not as much of the language, but seeing what we can do within our regulations. If that could be clearly stated somewhere, that's something that's important to me.
Yeah, I was going to echo some of the things that David said. Thank you for all the comments, all the work. I mean, we took a lot of feedback, and I think you guys have worked really hard to incorporate that in, and we're really trying to think about both sides. So I'd like to commend you guys for starting that group. That's going to be a huge asset to us. With that in mind, I would like to make a motion that we push this to the city council with the couple of wording corrections that we had mentioned in there that make things a little unclear. With also, I would like to see us put forward a next actionable step with signs, and maybe have that be a separate piece that the council can approve if they need to right away, of clear, defined signs, like was mentioned. Dog must be on a leash now. Welcome to the unleashed area. Enjoy. Did I miss one thing that we needed to? As far as and then the fence, some clarity on what that process will be, if we can add that into the document as well.
So it becomes not optional, but a part of the plan?
I'd like to see we're doing the feasibility study on Stodola, we're doing the study on the dogs. I'd like to see a study on the fence be worded in there.
You all need to agree. Well, you know what you would like.
If the wording was the study, the implementation of a fence as opposed to whether there's a fence, I mean, I think, or a barrier, whatever the terminology you want to use is, I think that's, again, I think that's really critical. There's just so much feedback on all kinds of sides and all kinds of issues, but safety in the park, when you have 20% of the people saying they don't feel safe in the park and 40% of the people feeling they're discouraged by being in the park by the presence of off-leash dogs, I think I think that helping that process by trying to create some barrier in the highest potential interaction area, or whatever you want to call it, would be a very positive part of the plan. To me, it's hard to have a master plan that leaves any ambiguity about our position about the importance of public safety.
Do you feel like Ben's motion satisfies that, or would you like to?
I don't know how that motion is worded. I think the motion that Ben was, I mean, basically the motion is, I think the motion is that motion for approval with the wording in the document, the two areas that Andrew pointed out in the document, just for clarification, as well as very prescriptive signage and determination of how best to fence or create a barrier along that main trail. So it's not optional. It doesn't say what the barrier is, but it says our intention is that we're going to have a barrier.
Just go, looking back at Ben, make sure that's okay. I mean,
Yep.
like I said, you all, it seems like
Yes.
you just tweaked the one portion of that.
So including those elements, then I would motion that we move this along to City Council.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Would you like to call roll?
Beiersdorf,
Approve.
DiLorenzo,
Approve.
Hanley,
Approve?
Ingraham,
Approve.
Jacobs,
Approve.
Samarsky,
Approve.
Wallach.
Approve. Okay. With that done, we can move on to reports from staff.
Thank you, Chair. First, we will talk about our information items. We have two information items this evening. The first one is the Warming House and Skating Summary Update for the 2023-24 season. Not much of an update, to be honest. We had a rough winter. Gosh, the weather just did not cooperate. So we do have the numbers here for both Minnetonka and Hopkins warming houses. But really, we had about 10 days of good skating weather. It was, like I said, a rough winter when you talk about outdoor skating in the warming houses. So again, we're just providing the numbers here. Obviously, the numbers are way down from previous years, strictly due to weather and days of operation. You can see that the days that we were open, what is it, 177, is that what it is? So let me verify those days. Those don't look correct, right? Days open. So I think that's the wrong graph. But it was like I said, it was a short season. We still had to hire staff, and I know staff were chomping at the bit to work, which makes it even tougher when you have staff members who want hours, and unfortunately the weather didn't cooperate. So that is the update on the outdoor parks for this year. Then I believe Matt is going to talk about the Reich Park court resurfacing.
So part of our overall refurbishment of our tennis courts throughout the Aman, thank you. When these existing tennis courts need to be resurfaced, we host an open house to ask local residents. We send a letter out to folks within the area around the park and get their feedback on whether or not it would be potentially appropriate to apply pickleball to one of these courts or potentially both of these courts. So on April 9th, we hosted an open house event at the Public Works office. A bunch of residents came by, and surprisingly, they were generally supportive of adding pickleball to the tennis courts, the two existing tennis courts at Reich Park. We did receive a variety of votes. Generally speaking, folks were into the idea of adding pickleball lines to the existing tennis courts, and pickleballers would play on the regulation tennis nets. So there wouldn't be additional pickleball nets installed, or the other option would be pickleballers would bring their own nets. Generally, the votes won out that we would add pickleball lines over the tennis court lines and utilize the tennis nets. This sort of reinforces the idea that these are recreational courts. They're not meant to be competitive. They're meant to be used by folks locally to ideally walk. We heard some feedback about parking concerns, pickleball being so popular these days. So we certainly heard those, and this seems like an appropriate compromise for recreational pickleballers to use these particular courts and walk over there on a nice sunny day. So the tennis courts will be resurfaced this summer, and those pickleball courts lines will be added.
That's my neighborhood park. I'm super thrilled that that this neighborhood agreed to do it. Maybe it can be an example for others in
Yes,
the future.
absolutely.
And then to item 8B, we have the upcoming meeting schedule. So your next scheduled meeting is June 5th. At that meeting, we will talk about the 2025 through 2029 Capital Improvements Plan, the CIP, and then we'll also have the Community Forest Management Plan. We thought that that might have been on this agenda. Unfortunately, we had to push it back a month. So we'll have the Community Forest Management Plan in June. And then just looking out a couple months, our meeting in September will be the joint study session and the tour with the City Council. That's an early start. A number of upcoming events here in May and June. We've got the mountain bike opener, which is Saturday, May 18th at Lone Lake. Farmers Market opens on the 4th. That's Tuesdays out at Ridgedale Commons. Shady Oak Beach will open on June 8th. Date night out at Ridgedale Commons. We're doing a little bit more programming out at Ridgedale Commons. So that will be Friday, the 14th of June. And then Summerfest, so our large gathering here at Civic Center campus, will be Saturday, June 22nd. And that is it for the upcoming schedule.
Can I ask one question?
Yes.
An item that I was expecting to see was maybe the Tonka facility study. I saw it on Minnetonka Matters, and I was wondering if that's a topic that's going to come to this group.
Yeah, the community facilities study would not be, and the reason for that is that those facilities are not located in parks.
Yeah.
And so that all just goes through the regular city chains and not the park board. But if you, I can definitely send out an update of where we're at. I can give the park board an email update on where we're at, and
That'd
we
be
will
cool,
be,
just because it impacts the skateboard park project, sort of, potentially,
you're right,
maybe.
You're right. It does
Based
kind
on
of-
what I read.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. And that will be, you know, within the CIP, you'll see some pages that are related to especially the skate park. So yes, I can definitely get an email out there. We are planning to go back to the city council here next Monday and the following Monday, so 2 Mondays in a row in May, to talk through the community facility study. So we did present, but we still have a little bit more to do. So I can get an email out, and then, like I said, we'll have a couple pages that will relate to that in the CIP in June.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Yes.
And if the Red Barn is not going to be used, if it's decided that we need to have a climate nature study place, and if the Red Barn is not structurally sound, then that report might also help us find a place to have that.
Yeah, the community facility study just looked at 4 of our current facilities, but it did not include the barn.
Okay.
So I think we would have to talk
But
through.
I meant if to see if there's any other space that we could borrow.
Right. I think after, this plan is officially approved, when we look at what to do with the barn, I think then there's obviously more planning, and that would then hit that capital improvement plan at some point. We would definitely have to that would be a large expenditure, I would assume, yes.
And I was hoping to find a room someplace that we could, at the marsh or somewhere that,
Got
so we don't have to renovate the barn.
Understand.
Is there any on the 8/7 or
A meeting on what?
8/7?
Yes, there is a meeting. I'm sorry. We just don't have anything tentative for the agenda. We do not have a meeting on July 3rd due to the 4th holiday. But yes, we do have a meeting in August.
Moving on, Park Board member reports. If there are none, then we will look for a motion to adjourn.
I make a motion to adjourn.
Second?
I'll second.
All in favor? Aye.
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 Thank you.